Today I'm going to tell you the whole story behind the hottest controversy in the paddock, the performance gap between Hamilton's and Leclerc's cars, the unsolved mysteries inside the red garage, and how this could radically change Ferrari's destiny in the 2025 season. Before we dive in, what do you think? Is Hamilton receiving the same treatment as Leclerc? Let me know in the comments. Your opinion is key because what we're going to reveal today could leave you speechless. How deep can internal tensions reach in a team that, historically, has always demanded the utmost perfection? Ferrari isn't just any team. It's the cradle of many drivers' dreams and also the tomb of several racing legends who failed to survive the weight of its history. And now, with the arrival of Lewis Hamilton, that pressure-filled atmosphere seems to have become even more intense, more difficult to manage and more unstable. What began as a renewed hope with the arrival of the seven-time world champion now seems to be crumbling after just a few races. Everything exploded after the Japanese Grand Prix. In a context where Ferrari was expected to begin showing a clear improvement in its performance against McLaren and Red Bull, what ended up happening was something much more disturbing. Charles Leclerc crossed the finish line in 4th place, while Hamilton barely managed 7th. A gap that, while it could be explained by strategy factors or race conditions, was directly addressed by Hamilton himself with statements that left the paddock frozen. And they weren't just random words. These were double-edged insinuations, like when he said, "During the first 3 races, there has been a small deficit between the two sides of the garage." With that statement, Hamilton opened the door to one of the most uncomfortable questions that can be asked within any Formula One team. Are both drivers racing with the same tools? Is there really equality at Ferrari, or is there a subtle but definitive difference between the car Leclerc receives and the one given to Hamilton? The media's reaction was swift. Social media exploded, specialized forums blazed with theories, and journalists began to dig deeper. Could Ferrari be favoring its home driver, Leclerc, who has also been with the team longer, over the newcomer Hamilton? The truth is, Lewis didn't stop there. In subsequent interviews, he went further, stating that they had already detected an element of the car that wasn't performing as it should, and that this was costing him more than a 10th per lap. In modern Formula One, a 10th isn't just a technical difference. It's the line that separates Q3 from Q2, the podium from points, victory from defeat. We're talking about a driver who has built his career on consistency, pure speed, and adaptability. If he says something's wrong, it's not an excuse, it's a wake-up call. And that's where the rift begins to form. Because beyond the technical issue, what really begins to filter through is the perception of an imbalance in the relationship. And that, in a team like Ferrari, can be devastating. It's not the first time it's happened. Names like Sebastian Vettel or Fernando Alonso could tell similar stories. When the results aren't right, and when a driver feels he doesn't have exactly the same material as his teammate, trust begins to erode. Not just in the car, but in the team, the engineers, the strategic decisions, everything. And the most worrying thing is that this tension is emerging when the season has barely begun. What will happen when the most demanding circuits arrive? When strategic decisions have to be made at critical moments? How much confidence can Hamilton have in an environment where, apparently, performance differences are becoming normalized as small details? And even more so, how will Ferrari handle such a situation, when pressure from the tifosi, the most passionate fans in motorsport, starts to demand explanations and immediate results? And the most worrying thing is that this tension is emerging when the season is just beginning. What will happen when the most demanding circuits arrive? When strategic decisions must be made at critical moments? What confidence can Hamilton have in an environment where, apparently, performance gaps are being normalized as small details? And even more so, how will Ferrari handle such a situation, when the pressure from the tifosi, the most passionate fans in motorsport, begins to demand explanations and immediate results? This is no longer a simple difference in track times. It is the beginning of a narrative that, if not controlled in time, could become a story of fracture, mistrust, and, in the worst case, a rupture. And at Ferrari, every crack can shatter with the force of a typhoon. Because here, more than anywhere else, victories are celebrated with passion. But failures feel like betrayals. In modern Formula One, every component, every adjustment, every millimeter of a car can mean the difference between resounding success and utter disaster. And when it comes to technical issues, they're not always obvious flaws. Sometimes, the most worrying thing is the invisible, something only a driver with the sensitivity of a world champion can detect. That's exactly what's happening with Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari. What began as a simple technical observation by the British driver quickly escalated into serious concerns about the integrity of the SF25 project. Since his comments following the Japanese Grand Prix, it's become clear that Hamilton isn't dealing with a minor issue. He himself described it as a specific difference in a component of the car that has been underperforming during the first 3 races. And that statement alone unleashed a storm of technical speculation. Are we looking at a specification difference between the 2 cars? Or does the real problem lie deeper? A setup incompatible with the Britain's driving style? The most intriguing thing is that not even Ferrari seems to have a clear answer. According to sources close to the team, what could be affecting Hamilton's performance is a combination of factors related to rear suspension stiffness and car ride height, 2 extremely delicate aspects of the current generation of single-seaters. After the controversial double disqualification at the Chinese GP where Hamilton's car was penalized for excessive floor pan, where Ferrari reportedly opted to modify the ride height of its cars to avoid future rule violations. This, while necessary from a regulatory perspective, could have directly affected the way the car handles on track, especially for a driver like Hamilton who has historically preferred low, stiff cars. And this is where the issue becomes more complex, because we're not just talking about personal preference. The car's ride height directly affects the center of gravity, aerodynamic balance, and cornering behavior. A taller car loses efficiency on flat ground and reduces its ability to generate downforce at high speed, especially on circuits with fast corners. If this change was more pronounced on Hamilton's car, whether due to a technical error, a lack of data, or simply hasty setup decisions, then we are dealing with an imbalance that goes beyond the tactical. It is structural. Furthermore, we must consider a crucial element that has recently come to light. Ferrari was unable to complete a full race simulation with Hamilton's car during pre-season testing in Bahrain. A technical issue prevented them from gathering the data necessary to fully understand how the SF25 responded with the Briton at the wheel. In other words, they started the season with an information disadvantage, forced to rely on the team's decisions, while Leclerc already had a solid base of internal data and references. This explains why, in the early races, Hamilton chose to follow Ferrari's setup suggestions without intervening too much. But that has changed. In China, he began taking complete control over his car's setup, seeking solutions on his own, in a clear sign of distrust and frustration. Nor can we ignore another technical detail that has generated controversy in the paddock. Ferrari switched to a pull rod front suspension for this season. This system, while offering aerodynamic and structural advantages, can also cause complications if not properly integrated with the rest of the chassis and the driver's driving style. And while Leclerc seems to have adapted more quickly to this setup, it's not unreasonable to think that Hamilton is still struggling with the adjustment process, which, added to all the other factors mentioned, is causing a clearly inferior performance. So the question is no longer whether there is a problem, but how deep it is. Is it just a poorly executed adjustment? A momentary difference that will be resolved with the arrival of new components? Or are we facing a more serious incompatibility between the car and Hamilton's style, something that could become a nightmare throughout the season? Because at this level of competition, when fighting for tenths of a second, any technical anomaly, no matter how small, can ruin an entire championship. And when the driver starts seeking his own solutions and questioning the information he receives from the team, what's at stake is no longer just performance, it's trust. And that, at Ferrari, is an extremely high-stakes currency. Trust in Formula One isn't a luxury, it's a requirement. It's the backbone that sustains the relationship between driver and engineer, between driver and strategist, between driver and team. When a driver climbs into a car, he's literally entrusting his life, his reputation, and his legacy to the people who work behind him. And at Ferrari, that trust has begun to crack. What until recently seemed like a dream partnership between one of the sport's most historic teams and one of the most successful drivers of all time, today teeters on the brink of chronic mistrust. Everything intensified at the Chinese Grand Prix, a weekend that was supposed to mark the turning point for Ferrari and that ended up exposing its greatest weaknesses. The double disqualification of its drivers, for reasons as basic as ride height in Hamilton's case and car weight in Leclerc's, was a brutal blow to the team's technical credibility. But beyond the mechanical failure, what really set off alarm bells was what happened with the radio transmission between Hamilton and his engineer. An episode that has been described as the exact moment when the narrative of harmony within the team shattered. During the race, as Charles Leclerc was rapidly closing in on a Hamilton struggling with grip and stability, the team requested a position swap. The television broadcast showed an isolated clip where Hamilton can be heard saying, "I'll tell you when we can swap." That clip, taken out of context, went viral and fueled the idea of a rebellious, disobedient Hamilton, challenging the team in the heat of the race. Social media exploded. The international press was divided between those who criticized his attitude and those who pointed to a supposed internal fracture. The reaction within Ferrari was one of total outrage. Fred Vasseur, team principal, did not hold back and openly accused FOM of manipulating the content to create a false narrative of conflict. He stated that this selective editing was irresponsible and damaging because it not only affected Hamilton's image but also introduced unnecessary doubts within the already tense team environment. But what is most worrying is not what FOM said or what they broadcast. What really matters is what happened next behind closed doors. Since then, Hamilton's body language in the paddock has changed. More reserved, more measured, more distant. This isn't just a driver upset about an unfair addition. This is a driver starting to question whether he can fully trust the team he's just joined. Because if the narrative can change so easily, if his voice can be clipped and manipulated, what guarantee does he have that his technical needs, his performance concerns, or even his strategic proposals will be treated with the transparency and respect that his level of experience demands? The situation worsens when the growing rumors that Leclerc is receiving preferential treatment are added. Some paddock insiders have already begun to suggest that the Monégasque remains Ferrari's main project, and that Hamilton, despite his track record, has arrived at a time when the team structure is already defined. And if you add to this an operational management plagued by errors, questionable decisions, and flaws in the most basic technical regulations, what is projected is not a championship project, but a brewing storm. The scenario is worrying, because trust, once broken, is extremely difficult to rebuild. Even more so in an environment like Formula One, where decisions are made in fractions of a second, and where the slightest doubt can translate into tenths of a second lost positions, or wasted championships. Hamilton needs to know that Ferrari is behind him completely. That they haven't just signed him for marketing or to raise expectations, but to build a winning car tailored to him. If that message isn't consolidated quickly, tensions could escalate. And what is a rift today could become an irreparable fracture tomorrow. The most serious thing about all this is that we're just starting the season. If in the first few races there's already talk of technical differences, strategic errors, media manipulation, and internal conflicts, what can we expect when the championship battle really gets intense? Ferrari is playing with fire. And Hamilton, while maintaining his composure, has already made it clear that he's not willing to stay silent if things aren't done right. The question is no longer whether there's a problem within the team. The real question is, how far will it go before it explodes? And so one of the most unexpected and perhaps most dangerous dramas of this 2025 Formula One season is taking shape. What seemed like a historic partnership between Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton, two names that single-handedly represent the pinnacle of motorsport, is being overshadowed by a string of technical errors, confusing decisions, suspicions of unequal treatment, and, above all, a constant erosion of trust. Because this is no longer a simple matter of on-track performance. What's at stake here is much deeper: Ferrari's credibility as an elite organization and the integrity of a project that promised glory. The situation has reached a critical point. Lewis Hamilton has not only hinted that his car isn't performing at the same level as his teammate Charles Leclerc's, but he has publicly verbalized his displeasure. And that, coming from a driver who knows exactly what a championship car sounds like, behaves like, and feels like, cannot be underestimated. When a driver of that caliber speaks out, he doesn't do so on a whim. They're doing this because they've detected that the foundations of equality, transparency, and competitiveness within the team are shaky. And that, in a team that aspires to beat giants like Red Bull or McLaren, is unacceptable. Ferrari, for its part, is in a very delicate position. Internally, they know they can't afford another failed cycle. Not after so many years without titles. Not after having signed the most successful driver of the modern era. The pressure from Maranello, from the Italian media, and from the millions of fans around the world is overwhelming. And yet, they have started this campaign stumbling on the most basic issues: compliance with the technical regulations, consistency in the configuration of their cars, and, perhaps most worryingly, the public narrative emanating from within their own garages. What happened in China and Japan can no longer be treated as anecdotes or minor setbacks. These are clear symptoms of a team that is failing to unite its driver lineup, establish a clear direction, instill confidence, and execute its operations with the precision demanded by the elite. And if urgent action is not taken, the environment could become toxic, performance will continue to decline, and the story between Ferrari and Hamilton could end in disappointment much sooner than expected. The question we all must ask ourselves now is, can Ferrari correct course in time? Can they re-establish equality among their drivers and internally protect a project that promised to return them to the top? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a decay that will end with Hamilton leaving Maranello without having fulfilled his red dream? We want to know your opinion. Do you think Hamilton is being treated fairly at Ferrari? Do you think there's favoritism toward Leclerc, or is it simply a series of poorly calibrated adjustments? Leave your analysis in the comments. We want to open the debate, read your theories, and understand how you see things from the outside, because often the best interpretations come from those who observe without the pressure of the paddock. And if this content helped you better understand what's happening behind the scenes in Formula One, subscribe and hit the bell. We'll continue to cover every detail, every controversy, and every dramatic twist of this season, which already promises to be one of the most intense of the last decade. Stay tuned, because in our next video we'll talk about the bombshell that just dropped at Red Bull, and how the unexpected decision to promote Yuki Tsunoda instead of Liam Lawson has left even Max Verstappen on the verge of collapse. Are we seeing the start of an internal war within the champion team? You'll find out soon enough here, where we break down F1 like no one else.